Welcome to 21st Century Conversations. I'm Nzinga Shani. Our conversation this evening is about recognizing and caring for people with dementia. Dementia is very common in our country. The record tells us that there are 5.4 million people suffering from dementia in America. The most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. Of course, there are many other forms. And tonight we have in the studio with us 5 people, 2 of whom are people who have been trained to assess people with dementia, and they're case managers. And then we have 3 people who are the loved ones and caregivers of people with dementia. And I'm going to introduce first our caregivers and guide for this workshop. Blanche, tell us who you are.
I'm Blanche Augustinelli, and I'm a former case manager at the Adler Geriatric Center and a longtime volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. Diane?
And I'm Diane Davis. I'm a case manager at the Adler Geriatric Assessment Center at Yale New Haven Hospital, and I also volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association.
And you were with us for part 1, and I will tell my audience shortly about part 1. Now, the caregivers and loved ones of people with Alzheimer's are, start with Brianna. Tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Brianna Mention, New Haven resident, the grandchild of Roxy Mention, who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's for about 15 years or so now.
Okay, thank you for being here. John?
My name is John. I'm a longtime West Havener, born and brought up. Been married to Linda for 30-odd years, and Linda has vascular dementia, and she's in Arden House. And I have learned a lot about it, but I'm also here to learn a little more.
Thank you, John. Thanks for being here. Betty?
Hi, my name is Betty Swindell. I'm a caregiver for my husband, who's had dementia for the past 10 years. We reside in Deep River, and it has been, not continuous, but a learning experience for me to care for him. And I have gotten very good service from the Adler Center in New Haven.
Thank you very much. And both you and John are living out the the commitment you made when you got married, for better or for worse, right? Because you're taking care of your
Sickness and health.
in sickness and in health. Yes, yes, absolutely. Now, we did part 1 of this program with Dr. Tampi and several other people. Diane was here with us then. And in that program, we told you what Alzheimer's is, and we showed you a video. So we're not going to go over those pieces. We hope you'll be able to see part 1 of the program. But for this part 2, we want to provide information for people at home who have loved ones who might be behaving differently, and you're not sure what is the reason for this behavior. You don't know what is normal aging from what is really, what really says something is wrong, what is out of the ordinary. And so tonight what we hope to do for you is to tell you what are some of the things you need to go and get help with. And the 2 people who are going to do this for us this evening are very, very experienced at doing this. And so, Diane, let me ask you to start. Tell our audience, why is it important to get help early with this disease? And again, we're using the word dementia rather than Alzheimer's because there are many forms. Why is it important to get help early?
Well, having an early diagnosis helps to rule out things which you could fix. Sometimes people are depressed and therefore look forgetful or confused, and that's a very treatable illness. There's some small number of medical conditions that can cause memory difficulties where if you treated them like thyroid disease, you could actually reverse the difficulties with memory. But this is also a journey, and the sooner that someone gets a diagnosis, the more able they are to participate in decisions about their care for the future. So we all know that there will come a time in Alzheimer's disease, and I think both Brianna and John's family members are at that point now where they are beyond being able to say what they would want for their care. Having an early diagnosis lets you say in advance, this is the kind of care I would want at the end of my life. And it also gives family the opportunity to mobilize support of other family members so that they're really able to deal with this in as effective a way as possible.
Okay, thank you. Blanche, is there anything you want to tell us before we start that why it is so important? Anything? I know you have been in this field for a very long time, and you volunteer also. What is it that, in addition to what Diane just said, is there anything else that we should know at the outset?
I think it's always important to get help if that's something that you need. The first thing would be, though, to find out what it is you're dealing with, because I'm a firm believer in knowing what you're dealing with is going, and how to deal with it is going to be to your benefit, decrease your stress level and make it better able for you to cope. So in addition to what Diane said, another reason for knowing whether or not the person has Alzheimer's, besides ruling out any reversible causes, would be that a person could then plan and appoint power of attorney for finances and healthcare decisions while they're still capable of doing that. So that's a very important behavior, I think, that people need to consider early on in the disease.
That's very important. Yes, that's very important. Betty, you want to chime in there?
Well, it is very important, so that you'll know when you have those things, because as Alzheimer's progresses, there's the language problem or writing problem, but then you need those. You would need that in the end to know that, like a power of attorney, things like that, and if you have living wills and things like that to be made, then they can make that decision very early.
And the person has to have the judgment to be able to do that.
Yes.
And so later on in the disease, that judgment may become impaired, beside the other things you mentioned, Betty.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to go on what Blanche said as well, I think part of knowing what you're going to deal with as a family member is also realizing that you aren't in this alone, that there are people out there that can be of help to you. So having an early diagnosis and getting hooked up with professional caregivers at an Alzheimer's Diagnostic Center, for instance, these are the people that are going to be with you on this journey, so that as problems develop in care, they are the people that will be able to hook you up with the community-based resources and the people that will be able to help you develop strategies to deal with the changes that your loved one has.
Okay, that is also very helpful. Now, we want to start the session with John. You want to start us by telling us what happened to you and your wife, why you figured something was wrong, and how long did it take you to figure out something was wrong?
Well, first off, my wife was really good on the financial. She worked in a couple different credit unions, and she was very smart, very intelligent. And she retired, and then another group called her back to work part-time, and she was going to work from 8 to 12 in the morning. She'd be there at 7:45, open the office, turn on the computers, get everything running. 8 o'clock come, and she was ready to go. 11:45, she'd close the books. Other people came in by that time, and she'd be out at noontime. Well, it had reached a point where she was coming home at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And one night she had gone to bed at 9, got in pajamas and so on. Then around 10 o'clock, she came back downstairs all dressed to go outdoors, and she's mad as a wet hen. Why didn't I wake her? I know she's got to go to work. Why didn't I do this?
This was 10 o'clock at night.
It's 10 o'clock at night. And that kind of said, John, there's something wrong. And that kind of started it.
And she did this more than once.
Well, there were a number of other instances.
But she came home from work that day, she went to bed, and she got up and got dressed at 10 o'clock and saying to you, why didn't you wake her up?
Yeah, all right.
And what did you do next? When this happened, what did you do?
Well, I calmed her down, and we got through that night all right, but it left in my mind that something is really wrong. And being the old-fashioned guy, I'm my own do-it-yourselfer. And I'm not one to ask for help. That posed a problem to me. I never did ask for help. It probably would have been smarter. But being stubborn like I am, that's how it went.
Okay, so what, for people at home who this has happened to, someone just told me yesterday, she didn't realize something was wrong with her mother, although her mother would put the keys in the freezer, the car keys in the freezer or in the refrigerator. Or her mother would get really upset with her saying that she moved something that she had put down, and her mother would get very angry. What should people who are going through this, what should they do?
So first I want to say something. Hindsight is always wonderful, and I think everybody around this table would unanimously say, oh, now it all makes sense. So there's often these very little clues that people exhibit, like John's wife became a little disoriented at time. Maybe she started having trouble with finances. But they're not severe enough to kind of raise the flag and make people understand the need to go to a doctor. But when enough of those things happen, these minor little blips, then I think, and they accumulate, or the behavior is such that it's a real safety issue, then I think it's time that they need to either contact their primary care physician and talk about some of these changes.
And I think the primary care physician is where most people would start, because that's the physician that they have, that's the person they know. Sometimes when people have very mild memory problems, if they're physically ill in some way, they may be acutely more confused in that way. And if you treat the bladder infection or the pneumonia, they get back to their baseline and they're fine again for a while. So that's always the place to start. And that first kind of ruling out of things that might be going on physically usually happens in the primary physician's office. But I'm sure that if your wife had gone in to her primary doctor without you, she would have put on her usual lovely show, and in 5 minutes they would have said, well, she looks fine. So that there has to be some prep work if you're worried about memory loss, of calling the doctor's office beforehand or going in with the patient to say, the reason why we're coming in at this point in time is because there are these memory difficulties about which I'm concerned, so that you already kind of put them on the road with you to thinking about, is this the beginning of a dementia?
Well, my wife and I had both been going to the same doctor for many years, and he knew all the ins and outs of it, and we talked about it, but there wasn't really much could be done with it. At a couple points he had someone come in and they did a test on Linda where you draw the clock face and the whole 9 yards that way.
You draw tell us what that is. You draw a clock and what?
Well, the person running the test will say draw a clock face and then put in some numbers in and then set the hands at 20 after 10.
Oh.
So this is a test of the front part of the brain, a test of executive function, which is
Yeah.
one of the things that starts to fail with dementia.
And over the years he prescribed various medicines which helped a little bit but not much. But he was not in a position like Adler's might have been to have gone full strength on this.
So let me ask you a question. Is that something that people watching at home tonight could do for themselves, to have to say draw the face of a clock?
I don't know
and
that you
or
would
they
know what
should?
it meant, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that the family member is trying to do the cognitive testing. I think you start with the primary doctor, and then if you feel as though you're not getting anywhere, oh, this is just normal aging, or this is nothing to be worried about, when you know it's a real change in your loved one, then you push for something more. Is there a diagnostic center that you can send us to where we can get a fuller workup of this? Or you call the Alzheimer's Association and say, where are the diagnostic centers in my community? You have to be an advocate for the person, because the person with memory loss may not know that there's anything wrong. So
Yes, I
the family
was
really
just-
does need to be the advocate, even in the early stages. Maybe they have a sense, but
They know.
they're embarrassed, so they want to
Yep.
cover it. Or they may not know the things that they're forgetting, but the family member knows.
I was
So the
just
family
going to-
member is
I
the
was going
advocate.
to ask you this. If John hadn't gone with Linda to the doctor when she got up and got dressed at 10 o'clock, would she have remembered
No.
that? So she went to the doctor and she would not have told him about this.
probably not.
So then she couldn't have been diagnosed, because if when she's sitting with the doctor, she seems perfectly normal and natural to the doctor, he would say nothing is going on. So that's why it's so important that family members document things, write things down that happens when they happen, put down date and time, and like John said, it was 10 o'clock at night, so he knows she had come home from work that day. Write all this down and take it to the doctor with you.
Well, writing that clock face is a little bit confusing, because we had gone to the Grime Geriatric Center, and they had done a test there, and they asked Linda to do the clock face. And somewhat later, the doctor asked the same thing. Well, now, you've got some experience. You have done this. You know what might be.
Abs.
So she was still
Yeah.
able
So
to
she
learn.
did it better the second
Yeah.
time.
Well-
A little practice makes perfect.
Anyway, that would be a little tricky to say, hey, let's do the clock taste.
Well,
I
and,
see.
and it is
Yeah.
certainly the case that if you present to a physician very early in the course of dementia, they may not be able to give you a definitive diagnosis.
Yeah.
But then you have a baseline, and over time, as things change, then there's a comparison that can be made. But
Okay.
but unfortunately, this isn't like cancer, where if you catch it early, you will have a cure. This is a slowly progressive disease over many years, and the medications that we have really only a very modest benefit in slowing the rate of the disease. So that's the good news and the bad news. The good news is, if it takes you a number of years to get diagnosed, you probably haven't missed a lot in terms of effective treatment, but you may have missed the opportunity to do some advanced planning, to begin to think about
Like
your
Linda
life
said.
going forward.
Yeah.
So it's really
You do.
the care kinds of things
But it
that are
also
put to-
helps the caregivers, the
Yes.
loved ones at home,
Yeah.
to understand what is happening
Yes.
and develop or get some skills, get some help in acquiring the skills to manage the
Yeah.
situation more effectively. Betty, tell us a little about, now your husband is 10 years in
Yep.
to his vascular dementia also, and you saying he's still functioning. But what, if he's still functioning 10 years in, what happened why you knew something was off?
He didn't know what day it was.
All the time? Or?
No, but that was a clue to me, that when he didn't know what day it was, when he says, what day is it, or what's the date? And when he could ask me that, like for a week in a row, what day is it, then I knew something was not right. When he didn't know the date or the day. Is it Tuesday, is it Monday, is it Saturday? Even though he functioned physically on a very high level, I mean, he still, my husband was the type he spoke fluent Spanish, he spoke fluent Vietnamese, he
Wow.
had worked everything, he could still do that. I mean, he could still function, he could still drive, he still worked. I mean,
Can he still speak Spanish now? And no,
no,
I
he
see.
can't anymore. But and I just kept saying, why does he? So I asked my primary care physician, and they gave him what test is that? The MM, whatever
The
that.
mini mental status. exam.
Mini mental status. They gave him that, and he said, well, I want him to
And
go
what
get-
is a mini mental status test?
So this is a standard 30-point test. What day? What's the date? Where are you? Remember these 3 words. Name these things. So it's a test of several different
Orientation,
areas of cognitive
calculation,
function.
executive-
I see.
So then he sent him for MRI, and then it came back. It showed up on the MRI.
Now she says an MRI. One of the things we want to, the doctor, Dr. Tempe told me that some people have a mixed dementia. It's not straight Alzheimer's or frontotemporal lobe or frontotemporal what's
Dementia.
the dementia or Lewy body. It can be a mixture, and there are 3 ways to diagnose. So tell us what those are.
Well, some is by just what the clinical course has been, and the different dementias look a little bit different in terms of how they progress. doing something like an MRI, which is a picture of the structure of
And
the
that's
brain.
more definitive.
Well, it's more definitive for a vascular dementia. You will see that people have had small strokes in areas of the brain that might correspond with the areas where they're having functional difficulties. An MRI does not tell you whether or not somebody has Alzheimer's disease. We don't
I see.
have yet in clinical use tests that can tell that, though in the next few years they are developing a test that will actually show the amyloid in the brain, and that
Yes.
will be able to give you a definitive diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, but that's just in research use at the present time, not yet in
Yes, and
clinical
we
use.
talked about that in the beginning
Yeah.
too. We showed that three-dimensional video. Brianna, you were very young when your grandmother started
Yeah.
having problems. Now, from what your mom told me, you were about 7 and your grandmother was acting differently.
Yeah, it was about.
Now that you're a little older.
Now that I'm older, I mean, I held on to those memories because as my grandmother, my mom was a single parent, and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. She was my caregiver.
She was your main
My
caregiver,
caregiver
yes.
when my mom was at work and things like that. So about the age of 7 or 8-ish, and this is around the time that she had lost her mother, and she at that point had been having what I guess now looking back is maybe some paranoid activity or behavior, but she felt like someone was out to get her. And I paid attention to those things because I spent so much time with my grandmother, and it just didn't seem right, even at the age of 7 or 8, for someone to say that someone's trying to hurt me or someone's trying to do harm to me, and especially for it to have been someone within our family, being that my mother. And you know, no one wants to believe that my mother, your daughter, is trying to hurt you. So, and I would go back and tell my mom, like, Grandma is saying things, and it just, I don't know if it was the denial from my mother to her mother, my grandmother rather, and not wanting to believe. It kind of just became a thing where it was, as a child, I was speaking out of
On his turn,
out of
yes.
turn.
Got it, yes,
and
yes.
and for that I kind of was shushed for a very long time, and I want to say for a couple of years that kind of it went on, and maybe around a later age, maybe around 10 or so, her memory, certain things, like just she would just forget certain things, like, and they were small things, so of course we ignored it because
Yes, and
we
this
thought
is
it
what
was-
happens so often, right? We say to people, that's just normal aging. I have shared with friends, you know, things that I've done that bothers me, and my friend said, oh, I just did that yesterday. Do we do that too much? Assign too many things to normal aging?
I think so. There's not all that much cognitive change that's a normal part of aging. It's almost always pathology of some kind.
Oh my God. Okay.
No, but it's like, I mean, stress can do that as well.
Yes.
So it's not where did I put my keys? It's forgetting that you drive a car. I mean,
So
it's
the
the
memory is
yeah.
different. So we all have times when we can't recall information
reassure
or
me.
we can't recall that word.
Yes.
And like Diane said, very often you can relate it to stress or